going on in Washington, D.C. We're home for August, which is good. I always like getting home. I come home every weekend. My wife and kids, and we have my son with us today, so our other special staffer, my son Will with the Buffalo Bills hat on, is with us today. But we're home for August, and we're home to really kind of continue to go around the district. This is our 74th town hall meeting that we've had. We set a goal of 75 in our mission statement, our business plan, because I run our office like a business, so we have metrics and goals that we have put forth in the business plan. And so today we're going to hit our goal. So you're the second to 74th going on to 75.
You're all invited to the 75th one, too.
You are. More than welcome to come.
Yeah,
More than welcome to
drive for you all.
And so we're going around talking to people, and the number one issue that I'm hearing, and that I'm very interested in hearing your input on, is the economy and jobs. You know, how we're going to get ourselves out of what we find ourselves here locally, and where we find ourselves in the state, and where we find ourselves on the national level. And you know, at 8.8% unemployment in the Southern Tier region, that's just not acceptable. 8.2 across the country. And if we're ever going to get out of the mess that we have a couple of charts that we go over, some people have been to our town hall numerous times. If we're ever going to get ourselves out of this debt crisis that's coming and that we're right in the midst of, this is an independent chart, and it shows you where the spending is, where the revenues coming in are, and the path if we continue down the policies that we've implemented in Washington, that they've implemented, I should say. This is the debt crisis coming to roost. And it's a debt crisis, it's a currency crisis, it's a fiscal crisis, and it all relates back to jobs and the economy. And so, you know, one way we're going to deal with that is if we get that unemployment rate down, to 3 to 4% full unemployment level. That goes a long way to dealing with the issues of the revenue side of the budget. And as we deal with those issues, I'm interested in your input and focusing on what we're going to do. We handed out a sheet of paper in our mission statement, in our business plan. We focus on 4 areas when it comes to jobs. We deal with the national debt, as we talked about, coming up with a credible plan. Because we got to have a plan in order to deal with it, because that will instore confidence in America, to invest in America, to put the capital back in America, to build the manufacturing industrial base that I am hopeful and committed to trying to regrow. And then the second point is comprehensive tax reform. Our tax code, I sit on the Ways and Means Committee in Washington, D.C. That's the committee that takes care of tax policy, health policy, trade policy. And we are firmly committed to comprehensive tax reform. It needs to be done. 70,000 pages of tax code is just ridiculous. It's unfair. It's not competitive. And one of the other things in the tax code that's a real problem is the lack of certainty. You know, we have a tax code right now that's set to expire at the end of the year. That's causing a lot of people to be concerned, and rightfully so, because they don't even know what their tax bill is going to be next year. So how can you ask a small business owner, for example, to make the investments to put people back to work? They don't even know what the tax policy is going to be. And so we got to come up with some things on a permanent, certain basis. It's kind of one of the fundamental principles that I believe in when it comes to tax reform. The third point is regulatory relief. We got to tackle these regulations coming out of Washington. Bigger government is putting a burden on small business America that's killing small business America, in my opinion. And the way we attack the regulations is, one, we spotlight the egregious regulations. We use the office to try to come up with a public voice, if you would. And a lot of these town halls have given us input as to regulations that are coming out that people have been aware of, primarily in our area on the agricultural side. You know, one area that we were focusing on recently was the TMDL standards in the Chesapeake Bay. EPA is coming out with a set of regulations that technically don't take into consideration what we in New York do, but are putting a burden on our farmers and our wastewater treatment facilities in such a way that doesn't even recognize the clean water that comes off the New York border. But because they're in that watershed in the Chesapeake Bay area, they treat us the same as Virginia and Washington, D.C., and who haven't done a lot in regards to the nitrates and phosphates discharges that are there. So we put a spotlight on it, and we've been successful in pushing back some of these regulations. Another example was at a town hall we got told about how they were going to regulate farms so that family farmers couldn't have their kids working on the farm operations. Those were a set of regulations coming out of the Department of Labor, and we put a spotlight on that and got labor to back off because it's a way of life. And so we're finding, and then the most egregious one that we always like to point out is when they were talking about regulating spilled milk as a hazardous waste site, but they would actually have to put that's how we reacted too. Spilled milk, they'd have to put the hazmat suits on and come in and clean it all up. We put a spotlight on that, and that was able to push it back. The other way we tackle the regulations is through the appropriations process. Is kind of strangling these agencies from a financial perspective to say, hey, if you're not going to do this reasonably, we're going to have to cut your funding and get your attention that way. And that's been effective too. And then the fourth point that we always focus on in our business plan is a comprehensive energy policy. We're committed, I'm committed, the office is committed to an all-of-the-above approach to energy. We need power to regrow this economy, and I think you have to do that with an open mind and with an all-of-the-above approach. That's recognizing our domestic supply of natural gas, oils, right here and even our backyard is a part of that proposal, but not losing sight of the wind, solar, geothermal, all the opportunities that are out there when it comes to energy. Because it's not only a power issue, it's also a national security issue. And anything that gets us off Middle Eastern crude, I'm going to be very interested in hearing those proposals and being supportive of those ideas, so long as they make sense and there's a return on the investment from the proposal. So that's kind of where we spend all of our time. That's where we spend all of our focus. And we could go on and on and on about the different issues that are out there. But the last thing I do want to touch upon is that the national debt at $16 trillion is something that we really have to recognize. And we have to come together as a nation to deal with. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a simple solution. It's going to be a long-term solution because we didn't get into this situation overnight. We're not going to get out of this situation overnight. November 2010 was, I think, a point in our history when I think they're going to say we went down the right track. November 2012 will be a continuation of that in my mind. And then we're going to continue to attack this issue going forward because we have to. Because, my son's here and many of your kids and grandkids are out there. If we don't tackle it, it will tackle us. And that's the simple truth. And so that's where we're at. That's what we're focusing on. And when it comes to the debt, I've always taken an approach. Everything needs to be on the table. $3.6 trillion worth of spending we're doing in a typical year. So in order to tackle it, we have to deal with all of the different areas of spending. This chart is a breakdown of where we put our money out of that $3.6 trillion. And one thing that gives me hope is that this election cycle in particular, we're not afraid to talk about entitlements. We're not afraid to talk about Medicare. We're not afraid to talk about Medicaid and Social Security. We're not afraid to talk about defense. We're not afraid to talk about mandatory spending. Because if we're going to lead to get out of this hole, you have to be honest about the whole situation. And once we have that debate, hopefully November 2012 will settle a lot of issues, and then January 2013 will come together as a nation. And we need to do that in order to tackle it.
I'm Tim Emily, the Portville Town Supervisor.
Yeah.
So where do you feel you want to start in this pie here?
In this pie?
You personally?
Me personally? Well, we've been spending a lot of time, there's been a lot of debate on the discretionary side, which is this area here, which is kind of the stuff you've been hearing about when you talk about continuing resolutions, government shutdown. And that's where people, I think when they hear the debates and arguments coming out of Washington, they hear about government shutdown, you have to keep it in perspective because they are really focusing on this little piece of the pie. I'm very interested in getting into structural changes of our government. And by that I mean getting into the mandatory sides. As supervisor, I bet you know your budget back of your hand, right? Where's the bulk of your costs?
Medicare.
Medicare, Medicaid.
Medicaid, and of course, maintenance of our roads and hardware.
Okay. So you got how about personnel costs and things like that? The actual size of government. Maybe Portville is kind of unique. When I was mayor of Corning, whenever I looked at my budget, one of the things that always concerned me is when we...
Our biggest increase is medical issues.
Is medical issues, healthcare
On a
related.
yearly basis, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Biggest increase.
Are coming from health contributions and things like that. So from my perspective, because this mandatory spending is kind of that represents a structural spending. It happens every year, autopilot. So these are kind of personnel costs, retiree health costs, the unfunded, and this doesn't even show the unfunded liabilities that aren't even in here, that are the projected future exposures that are down there. So we have to also keep that in mind as we deal with it. So anything that, in my mind, that gets into changing the size of government, downsizing it, I'm interested in talking about it. And it could be in each one of these pies. Now, when you talk about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, I'm very interested in Medicaid right now for our purposes, because in New York, as you know, we spend an inordinate amount of money on Medicaid, and we split it at the local level and the state level. And in New York, we have the Cadillac plans. Everyone's heard that term. They describe New York's Medicaid as the Cadillac plan. And under the Affordable Care Act, under the Obamacare packages, there's provisions in there that essentially lock us into those Cadillac plans called maintenance of efforts provisions. And we've been working with the governor's office on a significant basis, trying to say, hey, you got a major problem here, because this is saddling our real property county tax levies. And what it does, you have to maintain the efforts that were in Medicaid at the time of the enactment of the Affordable Care Act. And what that means, you can't change the level of services. So when we offer the Cadillac plan in New York, anybody in Albany who talks about Medicaid reform is really primarily talking about reimbursement to providers right now. They're not talking about changing service packages, which I think we need to, because the Cadillac plan is bankrupt in New York. And we're seeing it here impacting us locally. And one of the things that if you've been watching the governor's office closely, so we've been working with them to try to, let's undo this portion of Obamacare, let's give you the flexibility. The way they're going about it, different than what I think is the right way, which is repeal it for everybody. But what they're going through is a waiver process. So they're trying to say to the federal government, hey, that's good for the rest of the country, but not New York. So they're trying to get special treatment, and I don't think that's good
Can you
policy.
give an example of what you mean by non-defense? Is that research type?
No, non-defense discretionary. This is everything. This is everything you think of in the government when you really think of it. Housing, transportation, energy, anything that you really think of is in this piece of the pie right here. Everything else is kind of the entitlements for day-to-day operations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So I'd ask the question back to you. Where do you think we should start?
It's hard to say. I don't know it as well as you do, so I can't really comment on that. Just knowing this locally, I know that dealing with negotiations right now, and I know the cost of healthcare is completely, because we deal with the board, it's completely outrageous. And you know what? Nobody wants to raise taxes just to afford minimum healthcare, but I tell you what, it's a decision we have to make.
Every town is going to have to do it.
Town
of Hinsdale, I think
Yeah.
You're getting settled with it.
If you don't directly know, Town Hinsdale knows, I know, the board member here, we know, because we deal with it, with numbers, and people may not know, but it's outrageous.
Yep.
You know.
All this tax increase that we get with the 2% right now is going to go for our employees' benefits. It leaves nothing for highway, leaves nothing for nobody.
It's going to eat it from within.
Within,
Yeah.
One thing you can do to put it in perspective for these folks, too, out of that 3.6 trillion, 2 trillion comes from taxes, correct?
Yeah.
And we borrow 1.6 trillion. And if you shut the entire government down, everything, you still couldn't balance the budget at the 1.6 trillion.
No. That's a great point, Lee. Because, if you shut the government down, you're talking $650 billion. If you just fundamentally stop paying, now it's not going to happen, but if you just stop paying the bills, for example,